All right. So let's move on. We're going to introduce Ann Griffin to the stage. So Ann Griffin is a product leader who has built AI systems across Fortune 500 companies and startups for over 14 years. She's also lectured at prestigious universities such as Columbia, West Point, and major events such as South by Southwest. Today, she is sharing her presentation, Avoiding the Chatbot Trap, how to design AI interfaces that actually unlock business value instead of just checking the "we do AI" box. So please join me in welcoming Ann to the stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to be honest, I have a little bit of an axe to grind with AI chatbots. They're always just interrupting people at the inappropriate times. There are some that are incredibly useful, but as Alan said, oftentimes it feels like this thing where people assume it's going to be this really fast way to be able to implement something AI, and they can say, yes, we did it, we're doing AI. Mission accomplished, right? And I was on the plane on the way over here.
Excuse me, it looks like you're giving a presentation. Would you like help right now?
Oh my gosh, is that Clippy? Oh my, not right now. This is actually kind of rude. Thank you for trying to help. But this is exactly exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's like we have Clippy's grandchildren among us all the time now. And I actually, on the plane over here on Wednesday, I was talking to a woman on the plane and she was like, why are you going to Asheville? And I was like, I'm going to this conference called AI in Production. And you know, I talked to, she's like, oh, said I was doing a talk. And she's like, what is your talk about? And I told her, I was like, oh, it's about how not to just like overuse chatbots and apply them as the solution for everything. And she goes, I hate chatbots. They interrupt. She goes, yeah, I'll admit I'm not the most tech savvy person, but I'll be doing something that just doesn't need to involve AI at all. I'll be like booking a flight. She's in sales, and she said, I'll be doing some sort of sales system thing with the coffee that she sells. And she says, some chatbot will pop up and get in her way, and she'll try to get it to stop. And it gets to the point where it starts giving her directions of where in the settings on the site to like shut it off instead of closing shop and just saying, I'm gonna tuck myself away. But so we often give this type of vibe when we build chatbots because we're just thinking about how can we do AI and not what are we actually solving here? And so coincidentally, I did have that conversation with the woman on the plane, but I did these slides before I talked to her. So I want to hear, though, just an example, because I have seen chatbots in travel. How did you book your most recent trip? And I'll repeat it out loud so Alan doesn't have to give the mic to anyone.
Manually via Google Flights.
Okay, someone said manually via Google Flights. I'll get one more. Anybody else? Company booking system. Did you have a chatbot do it in the?
I would have closed it if there was one.
They said a company booking system, and they said they would have closed it if there was one, right? So I'm not gonna out this company. So I covered up the identity of their chatbot. But I've noticed a lot of the travel sites have actually removed their chatbots, thankfully, and it's not that I'm like, oh, chatbots never have a place, but there's times where this is actually more inefficient and painful than just doing things in a specific way. And this actually comes to this thing of how are you solving the problem, which actually gets into the interface. You could still potentially use the same AI on the back end, but just figure out what is the appropriate interface and what is the appropriate way to solve this customer's problem. So you're on this travel website and you get this chatbot that pops up, even though you have this big thing in the center of the screen that already is asking you, where are you going? How many nights? Do you need car or hotel? And now it's like, hey, can I help you? Maybe you're just here to complain, but maybe you're trying to book a flight. So I was like, okay, what happens? So I actually was like, hey, if I want to stay in Asheville, what hotel should I stay at? And it just responded with a lot of follow-up questions like, well, how many rooms do you need? Number of adults and children staying, the budget rate per night. And I was like, well, if I had just filled out the form, it would already be faster, because we all know it takes time, right, for it to even get to this spot. And then also look at the top. It has like 2 hotel recommendations up there, and I've told it only my dates and where I'm trying to go. And so I'm like, okay, well, what are those recommendations? It kind of scrolled past them, and so now I'm like, oh, like you know nothing about where I'm going. And I was like, okay, I mean, nothing wrong with a 2-star hotel or 2.5-star hotel. But I was like, this is in the middle of nowhere. Maybe they think I'm going hiking. They have no context. And it's like, mind you, this is still asking me more questions. It's like, how many rooms do you need, right? Where at least if you use the interface, which for travel oftentimes is the right way to approach that problem, it kind of defaults to an answer. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to enter it. This is really just part of the heuristics that we learned a really long time ago. Versus, okay, if we go into this interface, you could argue, oh, well, there's so many options. This really starts getting into users at least feeling a sense of control. And that little form we saw on the main page of the travel website, it defaulted some things, and then there were a lot of things where it's like, okay, great, this is actually faster than entering something into a chatbot, waiting for it to load, and then it asks me more questions. And I think this starts getting to other things I'm going to talk about today, is the sense of control, because a lot of us have things that we're very picky about like, I have a friend where she's like, I hate hotels that have carpet. So she has to look at all the pictures and be like, does it look like this one is wood floors, or does it look like it's carpet? We all have different preferences, and people like to feel like, oh, I'm not going to get thrown a bunch of things that are relevant to me. And this is why when we're thinking about AI interfaces, product context is king. And we're going to talk about what that means. So we're going to talk about 4 steps to designing the right interface for AI. And yeah, I'm not saying it's never chatbots, but again, I'm a little fatigued. Clippy was, I'll say, trying to be very generous earlier, but was not the time or place for Clippy to show up. So we're going to talk about what problems are we solving, who are we solving the problems for, how to approach the experience, and test. So this is the shortest slide, but this is possibly the most important slide. What problem are we trying to solve? So one of my favorite product people in the world, if you were here yesterday for the workshop, you heard me talk about him, Shreyas Doshi. This abbreviation that you're like, what does that even say? It's, what are you really trying to do? You need to define that. What are you really trying to do? What value are you really trying to bring to the customer? And if that is not best served by a chatbot, you should probably rethink it. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I'm like, okay, but fundamentally, is that really what you're trying to do? Or have you kind of added so many layers that you've abstracted away what you're really trying to do? And then also, why should this problem be solved? Some problems people don't really care about solving. Why should we, over-engineer solutions so that people can pick how many cup holders are in their rental car? So you also have to think, just because you can solve it, even with how much AI makes it simpler, should you be solving it? The next thing, very important, who are you solving this for? What outcomes do the customer and the user care about even? I think that's the thing of like, if they're just like, I just want to be able to compare a bunch of hotel deals, I want to be able to price compare, I want to see, which ones are in this area, that's what they really care about, then why are you making it harder for them to do that? And then how does the user solve this problem today? And this is really important, and I'll show an example of like later on is like, hey, if they're in a system where they're like, hey, normally they do this process in Microsoft Word. Well, maybe the interface should probably look a little bit more like Microsoft Word, unless you're able to add so much value, they don't care what the interface looks like. But because there is so much resistance to using AI out there in the world now, even just considering what context they're using it in from a visual standpoint matters a lot. And then also, what is the user's relationship with data, right? And we often think about like, oh, I'm going to get a big CSV and I'm going to see all the data going through the pipeline. But to them, they get like this really simplified data, and it's beautiful, and it's like, it's like, oh, this hotel we labeled it a really great deal. And we don't show them like, all the stuff behind how they got that really great deal. But you want to show the right data for the right user, because you want to think about some users are more technical than others, and they want to say, hey, can you give me like 5 different types of scores for sentiment analysis for what people are saying online about this brand? And other people are just saying, hey, can you just tell me people say they like it, don't like it, or they're neutral? And depending on who your user is, that matters a lot, and that's going to depend on like what actually shows up in your interface. And you have to think about the psychological aspects of solving for this, of trust and control. Just because AI can do a lot of things doesn't mean that people are going to trust it. Even if you have something that is relatively accurate, I've worked with customers where they come from the intelligence space. So they've worked in DC. Their whole reputation is actually very reliant on getting facts right. So if they go to their boss and they have like an intelligence report and their boss is able to poke holes in it immediately, it's not good. And you don't want to be that person who's known for like not being accurate, not looking at all the data. And so what I noticed with them is that they see one data point. You could have something that's like 99% accurate. And that 1% of the time that it's not accurate, they start saying, do you have a way I can download this as a CSV and I can just look at it myself? And they will look at it themselves because they don't trust it. So you also need to take into consideration what level of trust and control you do need to give your users, because it really matters in the interface you design. And these are mocked up, these are not an actual product. This is something where I was like, hey, if you had something where you had a social listening tool that was measuring sentiment, maybe this is something for a more technical user. I need to be able to give all these different scores. I want to show where did we get this from. Again, this is a mock-up. This is not a real product. But I give them a lot more control. And if I'm giving them a lot more control, I need to account for that in the UI. If I'm jamming all this into a chatbot, it's going to actually be a lot harder to read. And it's also going to be something where people might say, well, like, okay, there's certain things you can't really fit in that output. I don't trust it. How do I, have control over my experience where I can scroll, flip views, all this other stuff? But if you're talking about someone where they have a much more simplified view, like positive, neutral, where did this come from? That actually changes what the experience should look like. Maybe that can fit into a chatbot, not necessarily the right solution, but these are all things we need to think about when we're designing AI interfaces. Just because it has AI doesn't mean that you should put a chatbot on it. Okay, how to approach the experience. So we talked about who the user is, and I talked about even considering what tools they use to solve the problem today. So one of them is like a layout that aligns with how the user works. And so the other thing, and I will show an example of the layout piece, but we also want to decrease the time to value. Where I showed you that travel bot, the thing there was, right, it's taking time to load just to ask me more questions that I could have answered on the first page of the website. And we know from just years and years, decades of the internet, that the longer it takes for your customer to get to value, the more likely they're not going to come back to your product, or they're going to churn, or they're going to use your competitor. And so maybe they're stuck in a SaaS deal and they're like, okay, we don't have a choice. We're stuck here for a year. But like your competitors are always throwing salespeople at them. And they might say, hey, no, ours is really easy to use. Your people are going to be so much faster, is so much better. So that's why you need to consider that. How do we decrease the time to value? And also don't hide the value. I think there's things where people will sometimes do stuff where it actually makes it harder to see it and get that value out of it. And we talked about trust and control as well. We need to have that. And again, it doesn't need to be obvious that your solution is AI. I talked with some people last night at the welcome happy hour, was that like Instagram is an AI product, but we don't call it an AI product. We don't think about it as AI product. The main timeline algorithm, that's AI. How they serve ads, that's AI. But like Reels has its own algorithm. The discovery pages, it's like just a jam-packed AI product, but they don't just try to shove it in your face. And so, giving this example, I had a client in the GovTech space that worked on government procurement, and they actually helped people. They were like, we want to build this AI writing assistant so that it speeds up the time to write things like SOWs, SOOs. And my first day on the job, they're like, we already made these designs. These are not their designs. This is an example. And they're like, we want to make it so the chatbot writes it. And that tiny little box in the corner, something like tiny little box in the corner, they want to write a document that's usually like this long. And I was like, oh no. And it's day one, and I'm like working with this CEO client of mine, and I was like, he's not gonna like it if I'm just like, this is a bad idea. So I'm like, oh, do you mind if I just talk to some of your customers? We can just like have a day where I talk to like 4 or 5 of them back to back to back, and we just show them these designs. He's like, that sounds awesome. So we did like a quick day where just talk to these customers back to back to back and just ask them like, hey, if you want to do this, where would you go? And they're like, oh, I would go here. I'm going to click that. I'm like, oh, you want to do that? Where would you go? Click here. And they get to the point where I'm giving them directions of, in this kind of design prototype, where to go, what to click, and they get into the chatbot. I don't ask anything about the size of it or reading it, and everyone goes, how do I make this bigger? Can I expand this? I can't really read it. Can I just insert it onto the page and then read it once it's already there? And the CEO saw all this feedback and he was like, oh, wow, we can't do a chatbot. And I was like, oh, you're so right. We can't do a chatbot here. So we actually looked for inspiration from what other, I'll say, document processing tools were doing. And this is not theirs. This is an example that's publicly out there. So this is in Microsoft 360. Like, this is an example of something that they do where they have like the thing in blue where it shows you this was the output, but you see that it's in line, but it also differentiates it from the rest of the content on the page. So you can actually do this inline because you're used to, when you type, all your text goes into the document, even if you're just putting notes or a thing where you're like, hey, I'm going to come back later and fill this out. And so why should the AI operate any different? But obviously you want to have something that makes it really clear that this is the AI part and you haven't approved it yet. And so these are things we need to consider when we think about what is the right interface for customers to get value out of what we're actually building. Because if you put AI in a bad interface, there's no point of even doing AI. They're not going to get the value out of it. And so the last part I mentioned, I told that founder, I was like, yeah, let's get this in front of customers. Let's, see what they say. And that changed the entire trajectory of that feature. And so this is really important, is you do have to test this, right? And earlier the better. So get feedback even from the data output. So even before design has been like, oh, we've figured out the interface. Usually when I'm working with the data science team, I'm like, okay, show me like what the output looks like. We can give it via CSV. We can put that in front of customers. And then I'll actually get a designer to mock up what this would look like so they can compare what it will look like in the design, but then actually see this is the actual output. Because it's also important to make sure the output aligns with what your customers are expecting. That I'll say, I've had customers where they said like, oh, in the cybersecurity space where they say, oh, like, that's cool that you said there's this thing that's increasing my risk of breach, but where is that information coming from? Is that accurate? Can I trust it? And so these are all things that help you get that information before a single line of code has been written or the designs are pretty in a finalized state. And then also, yeah, you can get feedback on the prototype from your customers as early as possible before too much code is written. And also let them use the prototype. I saw like a product person once just show the prototype to the customer and they're like, and then you'll do this, and then you'll do that, and then you'll do this. And I'm like, no. Give them the prototype and watch them struggle. That is the way that you learn. Because when you're not there to hold their hand, they're on their own and that's when they get stuck. But in front of you, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I know how to use AI. Yeah, totally. It's just me. I'm not tech savvy. Like, I don't know how to use it, right? So let them actually use the prototype before you write a bunch of code around it. And then also this one point, I didn't end up advising with this company, but there was a small AI startup where they're like, we built this amazing tool that CFOs can ask anything, and it has all this amazing power. And they said, but our problem is the users don't know what to ask. The thing is, if your user doesn't know what to ask, you can give them some example questions, but chances are you need to have an interface that's probably a bit different and actually giving them more context of what the value is they're going to be able to get out of it. Otherwise, it's like giving someone a blank page and being like, you can create anything. And I'm like, there's a reason why most websites are not a blank page on the internet. Okay, final reminders. Your customer doesn't want AI, at least most of them don't. They want problems solved. They don't care if AI is in it or not. That's an important one. Chatbots aren't necessarily faster to implement. I see some companies say, well, we're going to do a chatbot because it's going to be the fastest. I'm like, okay, well, how are you doing it? Who are you using? Are you building it from scratch? I know a company that decided to build one from scratch and thought, oh yeah, we'll get it done in a quarter. And it's like, That's not necessarily going to be a good chatbot experience in 1 quarter. So it's not necessarily a cheap, fast way to implement depending on how you're implementing it. And then you break trust in your product's AI every time you ship the wrong experience. So, and that hurts, especially if this is the first thing that you're shipping that's a major AI feature in your product. The thing is that now they're like, I don't know, is that very good? I mean, I'm sure many of you have tried new AI products that had really big promises and you were super excited, and then it was kind of crappy. And then like 6 months later, people are like, oh, this product's really good. And you're like, oh, I tried that like 6 months ago and it was bad. I'll admit, I haven't gone back to a lot of those products because I had such a, I'll say, bad experience where I was like, I don't know, there's like 10 more products that already do it, and I'm fine with the one that I found that was working 6 months ago. And so every time you ship something that's a bad experience with your AI, you're breaking that trust with your customers. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I set the mic down. Does anyone know where it is? Oh, excellent. Thank you. Wandered off. Appreciate it. Yeah, we're going to start with Q&A. I see a gentleman here has a question.
Thank you. Great talk. On that last slide, you were talking about, when you ship a product that doesn't work well, you sort of lose folks' trust in AI. I'm wondering from a marketing standpoint, is it worth, why do we even have to say it's an AI tool, right? Why, this is a new product we've got, and you do run the risk of just to that point of when you're trying to market something as an AI tool, if it doesn't work, then does that sort of undercut your trust in the technology?
I would say yes. And then also this comes back to actually knowing your customer. Because some people, they want to say, oh, my tool's AI and all this other stuff because they want the investors to be happy, right? And they're going to feel really cool because now they're doing AI like everyone else. The problem with that is that sometimes your customer is in the camp of the people where they have already had so many negative experiences with AI, especially because like Clippy interrupted my presentation earlier. They've had enough of those experiences where Clippy's grandchildren are now the face of AI for a lot of non-technical people. And so when you have a product, even if it's like, oh, well, these people use software, they must be technical enough. There's people who are using software every day that them saying AI is in it is actually going to deter them. And then if you are technical and they're like, oh, there's AI in it and it's going to be awesome, and then it's like worse than everything else you've been using for the same thing with or without AI, it really breaks your trust. And a lot of this comes down to, you have companies where they're trying to, raise another round. So they sprinkle it in there and all this other stuff. And they think that's what users want to hear. But you really need to understand your customer, because I will say there's certain tools where if I hear AI is in it, I'll be like, oh, I'm kind of interested to see what's in it. There was like a user research tool that like aggregated a lot of user research and then like kind of supposed to give you insights at scale. It didn't work really well for me, but I was excited AI was in it, but I'm also in this field. But there's a lot of customers out there that, depending on what your product is and who your audience is, where they're going to be like, this is already a big turnoff, but I'm glad you're trying to get your next funding round. So.
All right. Some questions down here?
So I love the travel example, but there's got to be a better way to do it. So I guess the question is, when do you think about chatbot is not necessarily the answer? AI could help, but you need to reinvent the whole product solution. Because like, if I want to fly somewhere, I want to know like, I can park a car here locally. I want a direct flight if it's available, but then I want to be in, so if I want to fly to San Francisco, I could fly into SFO or I could fly into San Jose. What are my direct flight, indirect flight options? What's the difference if I then have to pay for parking? Like, AI should be able to come up with a lot of that, but then like the search engine for the travel sites can't do that.
And I think to what you're speaking about comes back to understanding your customer. And a lot of the legacy companies out there that weren't born in the era of AI, which is most companies, they're thinking about, well, how can I disrupt the thing that I've always been doing with AI. And sometimes it's, well, you could maybe in the future, but where AI is right now is not going to be the best for that. But they don't stop and think, oh, if I really understood my customers, I would understand what they're thinking before they come to the travel site. What are they needing after the travel site? Those were things where before AI, I don't know, it just wasn't worth their time doing that. There wasn't really a lot of value add or a way that they could extract value from that. But now there's a lot more potential. And I call this kind of like these edge cases of like, if you're an existing company, what is your user doing after they normally leave your site that you're not actually adding any value to now? In the past, it was like, oh, do you need a ride to your hotel, I guess? And now it's like, well, you already know that they have 4 people on a flight. You know what city they're going to. You know what part of the city that they're going to be in. I'm like, you can make a lot of really great recommendations, more so than you used to. I think there were kind of recommendations, but a lot more accurate recommendations than you could in the past. But it's really comes back to, do you really understand your customer? Or are you really just trying to like jam more AI into the way you've been doing things all along?
Thank you. I think this will be our last question we have time for.
I'm curious about what are the alternatives to the chatbot experience, thinking about headless AI applications. Are there ways that you can integrate this technology without using a chatbot? And I'm also curious how you approach the kind of non-deterministic nature of the outputs of the chatbot, given you could put in the exact same prompt, get a totally different response, versus some of the more deterministic workflows that people are implementing in their businesses.
Yeah, so first I want to actually keep the mic with him. I have a question for him. When you say headless AI, you mean like just, oh, you can use ChatGPT's model and like what should your output be?
I guess it's particular to some of the things that I've worked on, but in renewable energy, for example, being able to take your SCADA information out of your project, right? And that's kind of cleaned and stuck into a larger database where you're not necessarily chatting with that data, but it's just used on the back end to facilitate the cleaning and analysis to be able to get it to somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, if you're like, hey, I'm just using AI to process the data, you don't necessarily need an interface. But if you're like, I want an interface so I can at least look at it and see what's going on, doesn't have to look like this. This was a thing I spun up for this presentation. But you can have things where it's like, oh, what would be a way that visually it would give me an idea of the things I care about in that specific data set? Because what you're looking at is going to be something, hey, there's specific things in that field, which I keep saying use the word specific, but is very specific, where that you're going to want that, like, hey, like a general dashboard is not going to tell you. And so that's how I think of it. And the next question was that specifically generative AI is a lot more probabilistic than other types of models. And I actually had this conversation last night where sometimes you have to stop and think, is generative AI the best solution for what I am doing, or do we need to use other type of models? Because people just I also used this example last night. People use generative AI models like it's like whipped cream, which is like delicious on an ice cream sundae. I love that. Ooh, yes, like apple pie with some whipped cream, amazing. I don't want whipped cream on my hot dog. Like that sounds gross. You could do it; it would be edible, but that's not appropriate. So then I think about AI and like generative AI. There's certain things where if you need like a high level of accuracy, and that's extremely important, you probably want to look at other like options like machine learning, those sort of things. You can add guardrails and things like that to an LLM. Like I've worked with things like that, but you need to also think about what is the right model for what you're trying to do. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Anne.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.